Today's live coverage of the Lower House. I am Simone Absalom. The session will start with prayers, followed by a roll call of those in attendance. This is usually followed by questions and answers to questions, statements by ministers, items on the public business, and private members' motions. Before we begin, let's try a parliamentary trivia question. In addition to the separation of functions of the legislature, executive, and judiciary, a number of checks and balances have been established by the Constitution to limit the power of the executive. Is this true or false? Get the answer at the end of this introduction. In the session of Parliament, Minister of Education, Youth and Information Fayval Williams will address the House. Under public business, the Independent Fiscal Commission Act 2020 is to be tabled and taken. Minister of Finance and the Public Service, Dr. Nigel Clark, describes the Fiscal Commission as the guardian and interpreter of Jamaica's fiscal rules, monitoring compliance with these fiscal rules, reporting on fiscal outcomes, and keeping the public informed by providing independent analysis on fiscal policy developments. Also on the agenda, amendment to terms of reference of committees sitting jointly with a committee of the Senate to consider the bill shortly entitled the National Identification Registration Act 2020. The Customs Act 2020 is to be referred to a joint select committee. The decision to make changes to the Customs Act should ensure the modernization of customs practices and procedures so as to effectively and efficiently facilitate trade. Members are also down to establish a joint select committee to review the Cybercrimes Act. It should be noted that the agenda can be adjusted with items being added, removed, or replaced. If you're planning to attend a session at Gordon House, here are some rules you should bear in mind. No visitor shall create any act of disorder within the precincts of the House. No visitor shall be admitted to the House without first obtaining an admission card from the office of the clerk. Visitors who remain within the precincts of the House during suspension of the session are asked to keep silent. It's almost time to go to the main event, but before that, let's get the answer to the trivia question. We stated, in addition to the separation of functions of the legislature, executive and judiciary, a number of checks and balances have been established by the Constitution to limit the power of the executive. Is this true or false? It's true. In addition to the separation of functions of the legislature, executive, and judiciary, a number of checks and balances have been established by the Constitution to limit the power of the executive. These include the offices of the Leader of Opposition, Auditor General, and Director of Public Prosecutions, and more. Now, over to the proceedings.
Mr. Davis. Mr. Moore. Miss Smith, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown-Burke, Dr. Charles, Mr. Chin, Mr. Clark, Mr. Cousins,
Present.
Miss Crawford, Miss Daly, Miss Davis, Mr. Golding, Mr. Graham, Dr. Guy, Miss Hamilton, Miss Hannah, Mr. Henriquez, Mr. Henry, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Lawrence, Miss Lee, Mr. Miller, Miss Morrison, Miss Nita, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Sibbles, Mr. Slowly, Mrs. Vaz, Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Williams, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Witter, Mr. Wright.
Members, just before we start the sitting, I want to welcome you all back as parliamentarians After the Christmas break, I want to welcome the staff to the Houses of Parliament, members of the press who serve us, our drivers and our security personnel who work along with us. A warm welcome back after the Christmas break. In fact, I'm welcoming everyone, named and unnamed, who work together to help with the smooth running of our Parliament. And members, if we have learned nothing over the Christmas season, we have learned that if we have health, we have wealth, and we have prosperity. Indeed, we have everything we need. And on that note, I want, on our behalf, to extend heartfelt sympathies to the family and friends of persons who passed while we were on a break for Christmas. All the persons that are no longer with us are persons who have served our country at different levels and have served us well. And therefore, we extend to their families and close friends our greatest sympathies at this time. And even as we face the new year, and particularly the COVID-19 virus, I am urging us all to do so with continued caution and to continue to acknowledge the protocols that are put in place for our own safety, and to acknowledge and thank God for the grace He has extended to us as a nation, as a people. Members, as we start this new sitting, I want to remind us all that there is a lot of work to be done. So time is of the essence. I have been given notice that the ceremonial opening of Parliament is due in February, and February is just next month. So there is much work that we must complete before that. So I'm reminding everyone that we are going to be guided by the standing orders. Time is important. We are observing the time for statements, and we are observing the time for your questions. It's very easy to come to Parliament with a question that you have in mind to place on the record. But I'm urging everybody to listen to the presentation, because if the question you're asking have been answered in the presentation, the speaker is not going to allow the question. So don't come with a prepared question and not listen carefully to the statement. And I'm urging our ministers of government to come with their presentations printed and circulated prior to their presentations so that people can know what is taking place. Time is of the essence, and I'm urging everyone that we must bear in mind what the standing order says and the time allotted to us. Work has to be completed, and therefore time is of the essence. With that, we start with statements by ministers. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. We are all very seized by your very eloquent dissertation this morning. This afternoon, we feel that we do have a responsibility to not only respond in full to what you have said by way of our own actions and compliance, but we do recognize that what you have said to us is critical to the efficient running of this great institution and to enable us to discharge our duties effectively and well. and to give a good account to our constituents who have sent us here. Indeed, I'd like to join with you in wishing our members of this House and all our friends and partners and stakeholders across the island, and indeed our media in particular who share with us, and the Hansard and other workers, a very happy and indeed a very safe and healthy new year. 2021 is going to be a very challenging year. Indeed, could even be more challenging than 2020. It's a thought that causes me to shiver a little bit, but it is one that I have to contemplate because it's a reality that we face. But I think that the challenge is not beyond us if our collective will is summoned and the creativity that we know exists within our breasts is all properly put together and synergized. And we have a sense of oneness and recognize that within the space of this parliamentary democracy and the adversarial democracy that we have embraced and have embraced well over the years, there is that capacity to unite, to be one, to tackle this problem of COVID and its related issues as one, as a nation, as a people, and to come out at the end being successful. People recognize that perhaps about me than any other and feel that I am perhaps Mr. Optimist. But I'm only optimistic because I do believe in the human spirit and the capacity of man to do right at the right time. And so we want this parliament to do right. I'll always do the right things for the people of Jamaica, and all will be well. We share your thoughts, Madam Speaker, in regards to those of us and our numbers who have left us and have gone to another and better place. And we want to collectively wish their families and their acquaintances strength and endurance as they deal with that moment and indeed the moments that will come after. And may the souls of all of those who have passed rest indeed in peace. Madam Speaker, it is intended to have two statements today, but perhaps the leader of the opposition business may want to make a comment in relation to the remarks that we have just made. And I'll allow that, Madam Speaker, with your permission, and then we take the statements that are to be given by Ministers Fayval Williams, first, Minister of Education, Youth and Information, and then she'll be followed by Minister of Health and Wellness, the Honourable Dr. Christopher Tufton.
Madam Speaker, the opposition wishes to join the Leader of Opposition Business and indeed you, Madam Speaker, in welcoming everyone back to this House. We share the view that the work ahead, the way forward, is a very challenging period, but we also share the view that it is not beyond us to respond to the challenges of our time. The opposition recommits itself to working to ensure that the business of the people of Jamaica is done and done in an efficient and productive manner. Welcome, one and all.
Minister, has your statement been circulated? Thank you. Have you, just before you start, the member of the opposition for education has not got a copy of your presentation. And I think we have to get into the habit of having where are the copies? Minister, I urge you to hold a minute because she needs a copy of the presentation so that she knows what you're saying, so that our questions are relevant.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, let me start by expressing heartfelt sympathies to the parents and families of Gabriel Madden, Christiana High School student, and 15-year-old Felicia Lichman from the Roger Clark High School in St. Elizabeth. Both of these students are from Coca District in St. Elizabeth, and both of these girls drowned in Black River. I spoke with the families of both, and the ministry would have offered counseling and other assistance to the family. I know it's difficult for all the families and community members to cope with these losses, but our heartfelt condolences as they manage during this time. Madam Speaker, we're now in the second week of the Easter term for the 2020-2021 school year, and I take this opportunity to provide an update on the status of the face-to-face resumption of teaching in schools and plans for this term, the Own Your Own Device and the One Laptop or Tablet per Child initiatives. At the beginning of this term, starting on January 4, 2021, Madam Speaker, 129 schools were approved for face-to-face teaching and learning. These schools are allowed a 2-week period from January 4 to the 18th to fine-tune their preparations for school. We expect that more schools will be added to the list as the Ministry of Health and Wellness continues its physical inspections of schools. As of today, some 76 schools have actually started. Madam Speaker, the focus for this term is the preparation of children for their exit exams, CSEC, City and Guilds, CAPE, NCT VET, and the Primary Exit Profile, PEP exams. Grade 6 students at the primary level are scheduled to sit the first of 3 components of the PEP exam, the ability test, on February 23, 2021. We are aware of the challenges, and so the ministry has strategically scheduled the ability test first, as this test is not based on the children having been taught the body of subjects in the national standards curriculum. The results of the ability test in February will give us a sense of the potential rather than just the academic performance of our children. It will alert us as to what our children are capable of doing so we can adequately prepare them for the performance task and the curriculum-based tests, which are based on the National Standards Curriculum and come later in May 2021. So, Madam Speaker, the focus between now and February 23, 2021 will be on getting our students in a frame of mind to successfully sit the ability test, which comprises 40 multiple-choice questions during a period of 1.5 hours. The ministry will be offering additional special learning interventions. Students will be provided with fully funded access to EduFocal and one-on-one educational service in preparation for PEP and other external exams. Madam Speaker, the ministry has been providing support to the vulnerable student population by way of credit vouchers from the telecommunications providers. These credit vouchers have enabled beneficiaries, particularly vulnerable students, such as those who are near poor, not on path, as well as those on path, to activate data plans that enable access to the internet. Additionally, Madam Speaker, a mobile student support initiative will be launched on January 18, 2021, to focus on students who need further support. The ministry will be providing after-school classes to small groups of 5 for 2 hours twice per week using the schools, church halls, community centers, USF community access points, the Jamaica Library Service locations, and other temporary learning spaces. Madam Speaker, we are grateful for the support and cooperation from our stakeholders, for the useful suggestions from principals and teachers. we will continue with our consultations and fine-tune all our efforts as we move forward together. I now turn to the OYOD, or Own Your Own Device. As of Thursday, Madam Speaker, December 31, 2020, the application deadline, there was a total of 17,773 applications submitted to the electronic system. This represents 49% of the target. Persons will soon begin to get the e-vouchers through email and SMS, telling them of the $20,000 and giving instructions as to how to redeem and the names of the approved vendors who have agreed to the minimum specifications and eligibility requirements. There are 13 approved vendors spanning across 101 locations across the island. We understand the issues that many persons encountered with their TRN and student registration number, the SRN. All students who are enrolled in the education sector has a student registration number, which is given when they start out in grade 1, or if you enter school in a different grade, you're also registered, and it remains with the student throughout their school life until they graduate from high school. During the course of having announced the Own Your Own Device, 21,120 persons would have called or emailed the ministry requesting the student registration number for their children. All of the 21,120 persons were either told what their child's SRN, or if the child was not registered for some reason, then the registration would be completed. Obviously, there would have been verification before the SRN information was released. Regarding the issues with TRNs, the ministry wrote to the Tax Administration Jamaica about this issue, and the TAJ has committed to working with the ministry to resolve those situations in which either the name, the date of birth, and the TRN number are not matching. The ministry has begun to pull together the name, date of birth, and TRN for those persons that indicated to the ministry that they have a problem. And we'd like to say to all those out there who are experiencing this issue, they can call the hotline at the ministry at 888-EDUCATE, which is 888-338-2283, or 888-SCHOOL TIME. Actual number is 888-724-8463 if they encounter these issues relating to this Own Your Own Device initiative. Madam Speaker, because we want all 36,000 families to have a device in the home, we will reopen the Own Your Own Device on Monday, January 18, 2021, to give others, especially those having the TRN or SRN issue, a chance to have the ministry work with them on those issues. While this is happening, the distribution of e-vouchers will commence in January for those persons deemed eligible as of December 31, 2020. And finally, Madam Speaker, I turn now to the One Laptop or Tablet per Child initiative. Members will recall that the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information launched the One Laptop or Tablet per Child initiative through the National Education Trust, or NET, on October 29, 2020. You'll recall that the initiative seeks to galvanize the support of the private sector, the donor community, the diaspora, and the general public to provide devices for our vulnerable students. To date, approximately Jamaican 76.4 million and US 148,420 have been pledged for the purchase of devices, making it a total of Jamaican $97.9 million through our partners, the PSOJ, the Jamaica Social Stock Exchange, and NCB Foundation. In terms of actual devices donated, which is separate from the cash donation, to date, 5,585 tablets and 147 laptops have been processed and distributed since the initiative commenced. A big thank you to all the companies, individuals or diaspora or consul generals, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, alumni associations, and others who stepped forward to help in this initiative to assist needy students to participate in the digital teaching and learning process. Our National Education Trust has collaborated with the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, NCB Foundation, Jamaica Social Stock Exchange, and Junior Achievement Jamaica to provide mechanisms for the collection of donations in the form of monetary donations or in-kind device donations. Please continue to make your donations to help us reach the goal of 100,000 devices and ensure that each student in Jamaica is equipped with the device to gain the 21st century skills needed in our workforce. Madam Speaker, on behalf of the thousands of children in our schools, I want to again say a big thank you to the companies and individuals in Jamaica and overseas who have partnered with us in this initiative. Your help is enabling the ministry to bridge the digital divide and help our children to continue with their education. In summary, Madam Speaker, we are doing all that we can to ensure that our students continue to learn and remain engaged with their education during this pandemic, the end of which we know not when. In addition to the online learning using the learning management system, streaming of lessons via local free-to-air TV, cable, and radio broadcast, printed material, including worksheets and lessons, and a phased face-to-face opening, we have stepped up our intervention by launching the Mobile Intervention Plan to go into communities to rescue those students we have identified as having had limited engagement with their schools and working with them in groups of 5 for 2 hours per day, twice per week. Madam Speaker, I also want to again appeal to parents and guardians and the wider community to help our children. All the modalities are still available. Education of our children remain a top priority. We need all Jamaicans to be involved in this process. School is in session. School is keeping, whether virtually, remotely, or face-to-face. Classes begin at 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., Monday to Friday. And beginning later in January, many of our children will be engaged in small groups for after-school lessons. As I close, Madam Speaker, Habitat for Humanity reminds us that education is the most powerful weapon we can use to change the world. It helps people become better citizens, get a better paid job, shows the difference between good and bad. Education shows us the importance of hard work, and at the same time, helps us grow and develop. Thus, we're able to shape a better society to live in by knowing and respecting rights, laws, and regulations. Education is a key part of a society's growth and progress. When people are educated, they can significantly contribute to their families and society in various aspects and fields, thus creating a stable and stimulating community. This is our goal for Jamaica. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Just before, I want to thank the Minister of Education, and I want all of us to be reminded, she started at 2:40. She was to finish at 2:52, but she spent 2.5 minutes doing her sympathies, so she's well within range with a well-presented presentation, and I want to thank you so much. I am now going to urge the opposition colleagues to bear in mind the 5 minutes allotted for questions. Go right ahead, Madam.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Let me start by adding my own words of sympathy as we begin the school year to all of those families, teachers, schools, and individuals who have lost students, whether they have drowned, they have been killed, as many have been as well, or those who are facing trauma. It seems like every week we come, Minister, to Parliament and there's a statement regarding education in the Parliament. And it is because this is such an important part of our life and one of those areas that has been so disrupted, and we have to find a way to reset that button and to make sure we bring our students along with us. So I want to thank you for the statement that you just presented. I know that there are many individuals who welcome face-to-face, as much as there are still some fears from some individuals in terms of having it there. I'm sure you'll agree with me, Minister, that in many cases where we are doing face-to-face, that it is also blended. So in as much as we are doing face-to-face, there are also some students who are online at the same time. And therefore, we just have to make sure that for those students, we sort through the issues of devices and connectivity and so on. And that we also make sure that we have the necessary resources for our schools to be able to support face-to-face. Whether it is to actually be able to afford the connectivity at school based on the infrastructure that's there now, because some tell me that that has been a challenge for them. I know that you would also agree with me that it still means that the majority of our students are not doing face-to-face, because we have targeted some, and we are targeting those who are sitting exams. I'm still, every time I come, I still talk about them. I believe that we have to talk to the others who are out as well in a way that make it clear that they are part of the program that we are doing. We have lost almost a year already, and as we focus on the exam sitting classes grades now, we want to make sure that we're not talking about 2 years lost, because we are already seeing some major challenges, even as we do face-to-face in terms of the retention in some cases, and just making sure that we can move our students up. Minister, I want to thank you for reopening on January 18th the Own Your Own device, and I am pleased to see that you're at least attempting to sort through the issues of the mismatch between TRN and names. In fact, that was a really huge issue that surfaced as we were doing the compassionate grants. And we have been talking about it. In fact, there are still a number of individuals who were not able to come on simply because there were those issues. So I'm pleased to see that finally something is being done about that. Minister, there are a number of persons who have been saying to me that we need to remember our teachers, those with underlying conditions and those with concerns, and what are we doing to just make sure that the working environment, that their concerns are not ignored, and that we abide by the best practices, in work practices, in terms of how we treat with them. We are also, there's also the concern, Minister, about parents of the other students who are not sitting exam and how we bring them into the fold. I said that already. Infant and basic school, our kindergartens, preschoolers, seem to be also an issue. Too many of those schools tell me, Minister, that they are willing and ready to welcome students face-to-face, but they are not clear. You know, they have done what they're supposed to do, and they're still being told no. So I want to make sure that we pay a little bit more attention to them, especially because we understand how important it is for those students to come in and have their face-to-face. And as I close, I just want to add my own thanks to those partners, those patriotic Jamaicans who, both here and in the diaspora, who have come on board with the one tablet per child, because there is no doubt that online in some way, shape, or form is a part of the future, and we have to try and get all of our students to the point where they can participate, understanding that it is not just the poor near poor that we have to focus on, but we also have to focus on rural students as well to make sure that the inequities, the traditional inequities, are overcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. You were just within the reach, and we appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Madam Speaker, I just had two questions arising from the Minister's statement. The first question was, I see that the tablet OYOD, own your own device, you had got 49% of the target by the December 31st deadline. So a little more than half had not yet successfully applied. And I see where you're reopening that on the 18th. Do you have a sense as to how long you're going to reopen it for in this second time round? If so, if you could give us an indication as to what period. The other question was to do with the credit vouchers that you referred to on page 2 of your statement, Minister. The support for the vulnerable student population by way of credit vouchers from the telecom providers. I was wondering if you could give us an indication as to how much credit per family or per child is provided by that, under that arrangement, and what would be the total value of the credit vouchers that the Ministry has provided so far under that support portal. Thank you, Minister.
So I want to say thank you, Madam Spokesperson, for your observations. I listened keenly, and really there is nothing that you have said that I disagree with at all. Your observations were on spot. With regards to the infant and basic schools, obviously we are working with all the schools, and some of the schools, we've begun to actually give the schools the checklist from the ministry so that they can do a pre-check of themselves, so that when the ministry goes there, they're ready. Because sometimes they don't exactly know what the Ministry of Health and Wellness is looking for, but having this checklist now is going to prepare them to begin the work before the ministry gets there, so that the ministry doesn't have to come, Ministry of Health and Wellness, do their checklist and then, oh, you have gaps, and then go away and come back again. They'll be more ready. So we've become more aggressive in working with the schools as a ministry to get them part of this phased face-to-face reopening of schools. With regards to the OYOD and how long it will be reopened, our goal is to reach the 36,000 families. And so we're going to work aggressively with those persons who are having problems accessing the system. As I said earlier on, the two issues that kept coming up is the issue of the student registration number and the TRN issue that's not matching. The name, the TRN, the date of birth, they're not matching. And so we are going to, the TAJ has already given us a person dedicated to work on this issue. We're aggregating the data. We've sent some to them already, because we are intent on having this program, as was announced, benefit the 36,000 family. And we're hoping that we will do that before the close of the financial year. Oh, the credit.
The Minister had also asked about the credit voucher program and the value per family or per student that is being given by way of credit from the telecom providers, and what's the total dollar amount of that program available under that program?
I'm sorry, member, I don't have that particular number, but I'll get it to you before the close of Parliament.
Leader.
Madam Speaker, we did indicate that the next speaker would be
the
Minister.
Honourable.
Yes.
Dr. Tufton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm going to ask you and this Honourable House to indulge me for a few extra minutes to recognize and pay tribute to one of our falling health heroes, former chairman of the Northeastern Regional Health Authority, Mr. Tyrone Robinson, who tragically passed a few weeks ago as a direct result of complications from COVID-19. I'm sure that members in this Honourable House will join me in saluting his contribution as a Jamaican to the development of Jamaica. There's so much that could be said for his role as a citizen of this country, but I want to confine my recognition of him, of course, to public health. He served as chair of the Regional Health Authority, involving coordination of all the strategic and indeed his hands-on approach, I would say, operational activities to advance public health in the parishes of St. Anne, Portland and St. Mary since 2016, when this administration was elected to office early in that year. Up to the time of his passing, in fact, the cabinet, led by, of course, the Honourable Prime Minister, had reappointed him as chair of the Regional Health Authority, and I was certainly looking forward to his continued contribution. But of course, that was not to be, tragically. Tyrone was a friend, personally. He was a friend to many in this House. And hailing from St. Anne, the parish, he played a significant role, even though he was not an elected official, certainly as a public servant in the building of his community and by extension his country. So I want to recognize him, recognize his family, his friends, and, you know, Madam Chair, it demonstrates, again, the seriousness of COVID-19 and why we must join hearts and hands together as we seek to confront this scourge. He played his role, and I believe it's a life worth celebrating. Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Speaker, since March of 2020, Jamaica has been on a long sojourn through many aspects of the COVID-19 pandemic. We started with our first case, our walk through the challenging period of the spike in August and our ultimate declaration of community transmission in September. We have had to also strengthen our efforts to curtail the spread of infection and the many challenges related to the balancing of the public health prerequisites and the socio-economic imperatives of everyday life. Today, Madam Speaker, I can report that as of January 11, 2021, Jamaica has recorded some 13,760 cases of COVID-19, 123 being reported in the last 24 hours. We have also recorded with sadness the passing of some 315 persons, with 2 of these deaths being recorded in the last 24 hours. The country, Madam Speaker, continues to face the threat of COVID-19, and we continue to see spread of the virus within the population. The results of our efforts at curtailing the spread of the virus, especially over the Christmas and New Year celebration, is still being assessed. We still continue our rigorous surveillance of communities and special settings, such as homes for the elderly and infirmaries, to ensure early detection and mitigation. The government is still seized with the realities of hospital management and continues to use every measure within our toolbox to ensure that our health system does not become overwhelmed. While we are still in the midst of the pandemic, Madam Speaker, indications are pointing to some success in the management of the spread of the disease and its impact on the health system. We have, through the strong support of the healthcare workers on the ground, not seen the buckling of the health system under the pressures of COVID-19, even though we have had periodic concerns. We have also maintained over time infection rates below 2.5 per 100,000 of population, as well as positivity rates of between 8 and 10%. When compared, Madam Speaker, with international benchmarks, Jamaica can be said to be one of the countries that have been able to manage well the risks that are associated with the pandemic. Madam Speaker, last month we highlighted the risk associated with cases in Westmoreland. Based on our assessment, it was determined that state interventions were necessary to curtail the spread of the virus in that particular parish. Today, I can report that the interventions have resulted in the reduction in reported cases to 51 active cases as of January 11th, 2021. The total occupancy at the Savalanamar Hospital is now 56% for isolation, a reduction from as high as 80% reported in December. As such, Madam Speaker, the Ministry of Health and Wellness has indicated to the Cabinet that we will not require an extension of the special restrictions for that parish beyond the current period, when that period expires. We thank the citizens of the parish, Madam Speaker, especially their elected officials, for their support and cooperation, and advise that only through your maintenance of the protocols can we maintain and further reduce the spread of the disease. And Madam Speaker, I really have to commend both the councillors and the members of Parliament who really went in their communities, went on the ground, and really used their influence to curb the behavior and to get the following of the protocol. And it is an indication of what partnership can do. Madam Speaker, there are, however, worrying signs on the horizon in a few other parishes. As part of the proactive approach, we have always looked at the numbers, worked through the science, and implemented remedial action when required. Based on our current assessment, the parishes of St. Anne and Manchester are showing signs of uncontrolled spread. As at January 11, 2021, St. Anne has 75 active cases, while Manchester has 68 active cases. When assessed by population, St. Anne has 35 per 100,000 population of cases, while Manchester 43. Now bear in mind I said earlier that we were averaging 2.5. So to have 35 and 43 respectively is a major cause for concern. These numbers represent the first and second highest rates in the island. The health departments in those parishes have already begun to ramp up prevention activities with testing and contact tracing, especially for the vulnerable populations. Community interventions, which are key components of the response, have also been initiated with activities in town centres and in at-risk communities. It is at this time that we say to citizens, Madam Speaker, of these parishes that you can reduce the spread of disease through your actions. Pay close attention to the infection prevention and control protocols. Wear your mask, keep physical distance, stay away from large crowds, and wash your hands or sanitize as often as possible. This is a recurring theme and a stock record, but nevertheless a necessary message. Madam Speaker, the Ministry will continue to monitor the situation in these parishes and advise on any further actions that may be required as we seek to protect the population, especially those who are most vulnerable. I turn now, Madam Speaker, to the global vaccination thrust and its impact on Jamaica. Madam Speaker, non-pharmaceutical interventions are crucial to slowing down the spread of COVID-19. However, they are not able to control the pandemic in a sustainable way. The development and swift global deployment of safe and effective vaccines against COVID-19 is essential to containing the global pandemic. Since December 2020, several countries have initiated their COVID-19 vaccination plans. These countries, to a large extent, have invested heavily in research and development and have committed large amounts of resources in purchasing vaccines for their populations. Madam Speaker, currently, countries through emergency approval processes have procured and distributed vaccines to their populations with the hope of doing the following: protecting the integrity of the healthcare system and infrastructure for the continuity of essential services, reducing severe morbidity and mortality associated with COVID-19 by protecting populations at greatest risks, and reducing transmission of infection in the community and generating herd immunity. These universal goals of vaccination are essential, Madam Speaker, to the global march towards returning world economies to normalcy and ushering an end to the pandemic and the road to economic and social recovery. Madam Speaker, in terms of vaccine availability, as of January 9, 2021, there were some 43 vaccines that are being developed right across the world that are in phase 1 trials. This is the early stages of trials. 20 are in phase 2, which is a more advanced phase, that is selective clinical trials, and another 20 in phase 3, which is even more advanced, meaning engaging more people to test the efficacy of the drug, of the particular vaccine. 7 vaccines are in early or limited use in countries, and 3 are fully approved for use. The 3 that are approved, Madam Speaker, are the Pfizer-BioNTech with development in the United States and Germany, Moderna with development in the United States, and Oxford AstraZeneca with development in the United Kingdom and Sweden. Madam Speaker, other vaccine developers in other countries are at different stages of the development process, and it is anticipated that within the coming weeks, more vaccines will be approved and ready for distribution in the market. Of note are developments in the following countries, Madam Speaker. China has 4 vaccines that are near approval stage, some that have been approved in their home country for emergency use in their populations. India has 2 vaccines that are at the last stages of approval, and Cuba, our neighbor, has 4 vaccines, one of which is at phase 3 trials. Madam Speaker, the Jamaican government has had many developing countries join the COVAX facility as part of our strategic approach to access safe vaccines for our people. And I underline the word safe because it's important that a process be observed in order to ensure that the vaccine is safe. This collaboration, Madam Speaker, is to strengthen our capacity to ensure quality standards, leverage economies of scale for better prices, and enhance technical assistance to support cold chain management and distribution. As I had announced in this Parliament through the facility, we have been able to negotiate vaccine dosage prices of some US $10.55 per dose, reduced from the going average price of some $35 per dose. So, Madam Speaker, the COVAX facility that we have joined with several countries on, over 166 countries, gives us some advantages. And part of that advantage is to get a better price for the product. This price is negotiated, Madam Speaker, for 16% of the population and represents phase 1 of Jamaica's vaccine rollout plan. Additionally, I can announce, Madam Speaker, that further to my update in November, the Ministry has been advised by the COVAX facility that the first batch of vaccines that are due in April 2021 has been increased from an original figure of 1% on that date or that month to 5%, which represents, Madam Speaker, a total of some 292,000 doses, enough to vaccinate approximately 146,000 Jamaicans. Within this first phase of the program, priority will be given, Madam Speaker, to the following groups and individuals. And this, again, is not unique to us. It's a case across the world. Healthcare workers, frontline workers, that is, healthcare workers, elderly, 60 years and older, the JDF, Jamaica Defence Force, the JCF, the Jamaica Fire Brigade, the Department of Correctional Services, and our customs officers at our ports of entry. Infirmaries, members of Parliament, senators, parish council representatives, and other senior members of the state, residents and staff of nursing homes, and institutionalized individuals, that is, persons in the penal institutions. This, Madam Speaker, this number, based on our assessment, represents some 440,000 individuals. Madam Speaker, the vaccination of the elderly and frontline workers who are most at risk is crucial to the overall efficacy of the program. Through vaccination of the elderly, we will immediately cauterize the number of persons who have negative outcomes due to an infection of the COVID-19, and by vaccinating our frontline workers, greater levels of service delivery can be realized through the reduction of their risk profile based on an infection. So there is a rationale. We go after those who are most vulnerable, and the data points to that. Persons who have died from COVID are normally persons, 80% of the numbers actually, are over 60 with comorbidities. So they are the ones that are at greatest risk. And of course, our frontline workers. Madam Speaker, based on the pace of development and the need to safeguard the population, the government, through cabinet discussion last evening, has also agreed to begin to explore Jamaica's access to safe vaccines outside of the COVAX facility, meaning exploring bilateral arrangements based on the information that we have, and some of which I announced earlier. Additionally, agreement has been made to explore bilateral arrangements with countries that have indicated their willingness to partner with Jamaica to ensure the safe vaccination of our population. Accordingly, the Ministry of Health and Wellness, in collaboration with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, will begin the process of exploring how we can leverage our international engagements to secure additional supply access for safe vaccines. Going forward, the government will now enter bilateral meetings with states to include India, China, and Cuba to ascertain their level of support and to determine the best arrangements for acquisition and distribution of safe vaccines to the population. It must be understood that the Ministry of Health and Wellness will maintain its very rigorous process of review for all medical supplies that are administered within our jurisdiction. Therefore, Madam Speaker, the Standards and Regulations Division of the Ministry, in collaboration with the Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARFA, and the Pan American Health Organization, will be maintaining the requirements for the emergency use authorization for these vaccines. For the granting of emergency use authorization, the vaccine must meet one of the following criteria, Madam Speaker. Be included, firstly, in the World Health Organization emergency use listing for prevention of SARS-CoV-2 infection, COVID-19. Secondly, be granted authorization for emergency use for prevention of COVID-19 by one of the following stringent national regulatory authorities of reference: the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, Health Canada, and the European Medicines Agency. The vaccine can only be used, Madam Speaker, in addition to this, for the period of authorization. Finally, Madam Speaker, the Ministry of Health and Wellness takes note of the issues that have arisen due to the change in the travel procedures for persons returning or traveling to Canada and the United Kingdom. Effective on January 6, 2021, persons traveling to Canada will be required to submit a negative PCR test 96 hours before landing. These new restrictions have posed significant challenges to the travel market and has impacted directly at least 2,000 persons traveling to Canada during this week. Given the issues affecting our own testing processes for public health interventions, the Ministry has assessed that the testing for travel could not be accommodated by the government's national lab system. Therefore, in collaboration with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Tourism, and the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, the Ministry of Health and Wellness initiated early discussions with the Jamaica Hotel and Tourist Association, the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, and the Canadian High Commission in Jamaica to accelerate the following. 1, mobilize private labs to support testing for persons who must travel, negotiate testing of samples using collaboration with overseas labs, establish partnerships with private labs and regional labs to expand capacity for testing, and support the private sector to ensure effective use of testing within the country. Additionally, Madam Speaker, the Ministry has approved 8 private labs for antigen testing and 1 private lab for PCR testing. These approvals have sought to strengthen the level of testing within the country and to provide the greater access to citizens who require testing for reasons outside of clinical and public health actions. Madam Speaker, the government's commitment remains to safeguard the health and wellness or well-being of every Jamaican, even as we continue to implore Jamaicans from all walks of life to play their part in reducing the spread of this disease. COVID-19 is still a clear and present danger and is not over. Let us all protect ourselves from COVID-19 and at the same time protect each other. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tufton. And in recognition of your presentation and that you're trying to safeguard our health, we gave you 6 additional minutes. And as such, we are giving the member of the opposition some extra time if he needs, a few minutes to make his presentation. I'm really serious about us trying to hold to time because there's much work to be done, really.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to thank the Minister for this presentation to the Parliament. At the outset, I also want to extend my condolences to the family of Tyrone Robinson, who I have worked with. I have known prior to being the opposition spokesman on health as Member of Parliament for Central St. Mary, and we have worked together. And interestingly, he has his roots in my constituency. Madam Speaker, as I said, I want to thank the Minister for the update that he has given to us in the Parliament. The reality, however, Madam Speaker, is that coming from a positivity rate, as the Minister indicated, of between 8 and 10%, the indication today is that we have gone to about 14%, and it's really coming the 2 weeks after the Christmas and the New Year's celebration, which all indications suggested prior to now that we'll have increase in the numbers. So there is, Minister, as you have rightly indicated, there's cause for concern right now. The fact too, Madam Speaker, is that the Minister indicated that the measures that have to be taken outside of us getting the vaccine is the method of the protocols that have been outlined by the Minister. But, Minister, you pointed out that whereas Manchester and St. Anne now are topping the list in that order of the rates per 100,000, I want you to pay special attention through your technocrats and through the region to the overcrowding which is occurring at your facilities, your health facilities. Particularly, there was a social media posting as well as information reaching me this morning, Minister, where the St. Anne's Bay Hospital at 7 a.m. where people were waiting to get medical attention. You had people crowding on benches which are stacked like pre-COVID times, Madam Speaker, and you had as much as 5 or 6 persons sitting on one bench and one directly behind. There was no social distancing, there was no physical distancing, that is. And as the ministry which has responsibility for that particular area, it is something that needs to be looked at, Minister, so that the examples can be set from that particular area. Madam Speaker, the whole aspect of the arrangements for the vaccination is welcome. The opposition still, however, calls on the minister to still consider our call to have a member of the opposition on the Vaccine Commission. The measures indicated, or the plan indicated here, is welcome, particularly in light of the fact that instead of the 16% that we would have been getting in the second quarter of this calendar year, that has now been increased to 5%, meaning that we were looking initially at about 28,000 persons being vaccinated from the first tranche to now 140,000. And that, Madam Speaker, is good news for the country. Minister, I would like to know whether in light of this change, whether we are still at the 16% for the entire 2021, or the numbers may go up as a consequence of the improvement in supply. And having said that, Madam Speaker, I am particularly happy that the government has decided to look at bilateral arrangements to get vaccines available. You will recall, Madam Speaker, that a couple of weeks ago in this very Parliament, when the Minister made his presentation, we asked that the government look at engaging our bilateral partners to see whether some arrangements could be made to have the vaccine. And we're happy that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade has now been tasked by the government to look into securing and procuring these for the country. Minister, you indicated further, too, that with the price reduction through the COVAX facility from about 30 to a third of that, that's around $10, I want the assurance given to the Parliament, as was given by the Prime Minister in the month of August last year, that all Jamaicans would receive the COVID vaccine free of cost, as was indicated by the Prime Minister, and what provisions will be made in the budget to have this done. In terms of the groups that will be vaccinated first, Minister, you indicated a group here, which, as you indicated, is what is usually in the public health sector across the world. As looking, though, that there are persons with comorbid conditions, which some of whom would fall into this category but are not necessarily named as persons. And I'm just thinking that most diabetics and hypertensives would be in the over age 60 inclusion, but the asthmatics have not been indicated as a group particularly, and they are prone to respiratory illnesses, which would make them more susceptible to having complications of COVID-19 infections. The other area, Minister, you said these are the criteria for us getting the vaccines if they are approved by these agencies. But you have left out the one for the UK. Is it that we are no longer looking at the three agencies you mentioned, approval, World Health Organization, and/or emergency authorization used by US FDA, Health Canada, European Medicine Agency. Recall that Britain is no longer part of the European Union, and they have their own agency now. Are they part of this inclusion here? And why not if they're not? Thank you very much. The matter, Minister, of the testing and the requirements for return to the various countries. Canada led the charge, and I gather that other countries, the UK has joined them, but other countries might be joining them as well. And the need to get PCR testing done, more PCR testing done in this country. We recognize that as a significant investment for private sector to get involved, but I am heartened by the fact that there's encouragement for the various agencies in the country, including the Jamaica Hotel and Tourist Association, as well as the involvement of the government to get more facilities offering the PCR testing so that the burden will not shift or will not be on the government to provide it when we need to have it for our own persons within the country. So it is a welcome move. But there's another matter, Minister, in the closing part of your statement which we need to elaborate on, and that is the whole aspect of the approval for the private laboratories to do antigen testing. It is our view, Minister, that that particular area of testing, that particular area, could have been widened in terms of training by PAHO, which commenced, as your ministry publications indicated, from October, November last year, and having more entities certified to provide this test. We have seen in the publication on a Sunday newspaper where there was an underground market, and you will find that in any environment where there is a shortage based on demand and supply, you will have a situation where people will tend to gravitate to areas where they want without having the approval of the Ministry of Health. And it is our view that had the number of entities been, had they widened the number of entities offering this, then there's every likelihood that we would be able to reduce the numbers who will tend to go to the underground economy or the underground medical or the underground, because we're not certain whether there's medical persons who are operating this underground one to get the test done. So those basically are my comments, and I want to say, Minister, that we still would advise our people, as you have done, to continue with the protocols, to observing the protocols. And finally, I want to say to our health workers to thank them and congratulating them for protecting this country in the yeoman service that they have been doing over the period of time.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, through you. Thank you, colleague. I want to just recognize you and commend you for very constructive points. And I think it augurs well for the joint approach to the overcoming the COVID threat that we face. On the issue of positivity rate and the 14% that you cited, remember now that we look at trends. So it goes up and down, but based on the trend analysis, it's clear that we're doing better than, we're not doing badly. Where you have the spikes or surges, we try to confine to particular geographic locale, which is why St. Ann and Manchester are of concern, because those numbers are really high, and which is why we're happy with what is happening in Westmoreland. But we will certainly continue to encourage the management of that. As it relates to the holiday period, it's still being assessed. I must say I am encouraged. I'm taught in public health by the practitioners to be conservative. But nevertheless, I'm encouraged because, we're not where I thought we probably would have been. But it's still early days, so let me just say we're still assessing and we will intervene as necessary. On the issues of overcrowding of health centers, all our public health facilities have strict protocols that we expect to be followed, and that includes seating arrangements and so on. So to the extent that any particular one is in breach of that, we will ask the regions to assess and to report you said yourself, social media posts. If you bring it to my attention, I'll certainly raise it. On the issues of around the 5%, that's a good news. Yes, more persons will be able to access early. How will that impact the 16%? As of now, the commitment that we have paid into the fund for is the 16%. And that's a conservative estimate of what would be available. I think it's 2 billion dosages over the first year was what was forecasted. That could change, I think, and indeed I think it will. But I'd prefer to wait until it does change to elaborate. I think the bilateral arrangements could mean that we would see more persons having access than less. So I'm encouraged by that and what is happening now in terms of approvals. The commitment of the government, as echoed by the Honourable Prime Minister, is that the vaccine would be made available to free or at the cost to all taxpayers collectively, the state. So the public health system would administer. But I will say, I certainly would like to see the private players offering a window for those who can afford to pay. We look at public health in a holistic way. It's public and private. The more people pay, if they can afford to, through private arrangements, the less stress on the public system. So I wouldn't dismiss the private arrangement, but certainly from the public space, that would be available. In terms of ages under 60 that have comorbidities like asthma and so on, other challenges, I think it's a good point, and I'm of that mindset that we should make it available to persons who, based on a doctor's assessment, a clinical assessment, would be better off having the vaccine and would be less at risk. In terms of the UK's agency, yes, I think that's worth looking at also. I think that we were just assuming that the standards would be similar with the European Union, even though I know it's a separate jurisdiction now. And in terms of the expansion of PCR testing, it's something that we have occupied our minds with as a government and certainly in public health. And we would very much like to see the private sector stepping up and offering more testing. So we have never sought to restrict, only to the extent that we insist on quality control. And part of the challenge, which was reflected in the media space over the weekend, and concern of public health, is that we don't rush to make access at the expense of quality control, because you are trying to solve one problem and creating several others. As you know, a new virus requires data management, data assessment in order to treat. And to the extent that the quality control is not there, could be a challenge. So the standards that we set are not to restrict the private sector. It is to ensure that the public gets the best possible care. And to this extent, only one entity has been able to qualify. There's a second that we're working with. And I want to use this opportunity to announce to the country and to the private sector or any other stakeholder, if you have the machines, if you have the personnel, and if you have access to the raw materials, the reagents that meet the standards as prescribed by the WHO, we will work with you to establish and expand it. Part of the challenge is that not many people do, and this is not a Jamaica problem, it's a global challenge, which is why I said publicly that I think part of the announcement by these other jurisdictions, and understandably so, is because it's going to restrict travel as part of the fear that they have for their public health system. And then the final one about, well, it's the same thing, COVID antigen testing. We trained all the labs that made themselves available to be trained, because we did announce for persons who were interested. Those 8 labs or 8 entities, they came forward. They were willing to invest the time, the effort, had the people, and we had to work with PAHO for the training. So it's, again, not that we have restricted anyone, and we are prepared to expand further. Thank you.
Sorry. Just one other, Madam Speaker, with your leave. Minister, just one exhortation. The experience that we had 2 years ago as it relates to the flu vaccine, where we had, towards the latter part of the period when it was effective, a significant amount left back at various agencies of the ministry in the regions. A suggestion that I had omitted to make just now was that as it relates to COVID, and I don't know how the machinations of the commission is, but that there is a individual in the ministry who has overall sight of it as it goes out, so that we don't have them lying in places where it is not utilized. The vaccine.
So, Madam Speaker, through you again, in another week or so, maybe as early as next session of Parliament, I intend, having taken it to Cabinet and gotten their approval and sign off, the COVID plan, because we are now in the heights of the finer details of the plan. And part of that plan is to provide information around access, and this is why we're going bilateral as well as COVAX, to determine numbers, to determine inventory, control and management, so storage, logistics, distribution points, conditions of distribution, as well as persons who qualify to ensure that the right persons have access. It's a very complicated process. It's not unusual, because we are a country that has a strong tradition of immunization and family medicine, headed by Dr. Ennis, and of course supported by the full team, are busy working. We have a working group that meets regularly. And then from there is the overall stakeholder body that coordinates. So I intend to update the country on the overall vaccine plan in short order, which will address some of those concerns. And of course, we have the special committee of Parliament, which I'm hoping to meet in another week or so, where you can ventilate a little more on that.
Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following. Ministry Paper Number 1 of 2020, entitled Cabinet Agenda Issues, dated October 5, 2020. Ministry Paper Number 2 of 2020, entitled Cabinet Agenda Issues, dated October 12, 2020. Ministry Paper Number 3 of 2021, entitled Cabinet Agenda Issues, dated October 26, 2020. Annual Report on Audited Financial Statements of the Toll Authority for the financial year 2018-2019. Annual Report for the Office of the Political Ombudsman for the year ending December 2018. Annual Report for eGov Jamaica Limited for the financial year 2019-2020. Annual Report for the Auditor General's Department for the financial year 2019-2020. Annual Report on Audited Financial Statement for the Jamaica Social Investment Fund for the financial year 2019-2020. Annual Report for the Financial Investigations Division for the fiscal year 2016-2017. Annual Report for E-Learning Jamaica Company Limited for the year 2019-2020. Report of the Ethics Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberations on the motion for exemption brought on behalf of the Member of Parliament for Clarendon Northwestern. Annual Report of the Tourism Enhancement Fund for the year 2019-2020. And Annual Report for Land Divestment for the year 2019-2020.
Bills brought from the Senate.
The following is a message from the President of the Senate. To the Honorable House of Representatives, I have the honor to advise the Honorable House of Representatives that on the 12th day of December 2020, the following bills were passed in the Senate without amendment. The National Housing Trust Amendment Special Provisions Act 2020, an act to further amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act, and the Income Tax Amendment Act 2020. Signed, Thomas Tavares Finson, OJCD QC, JP, President of the Senate.
petitions, papers, reports from committees.
Madam Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of the House a copy of the report of the Ethics Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberation on the motion for exemption brought on behalf of the Member of Parliament for Clarendon North Eastern.
Notices of motions given orally.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the following motion. Be it resolved that the report of the Ethics Committee for the House of Representatives on its deliberations on the motion for exemptions brought on behalf of the Member of Parliament for Clarendon North Western, which was laid on the table of the House on the 12th day of January 2021, be approved. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move, whereas on December 15, 2020, this Honourable House approved the motion appointing a select committee comprising the following members: Honourable Delroy Chuck, Honourable Fayval Williams, Mrs. Marlene Malahou-Fort, Honourable Marsha Smith, Honourable Robert Morgan, Mr. Dwight Sibbles, Mr. Julian Robinson, Mr. Hugh Graham, Mr. Lothan Cousins, to sit jointly with a similar committee appointed by the Senate to consider and report on a bill shortly entitled the National Identification and Registration Act 2020. And whereas the committee has commenced its sittings and has found during its deliberations that it is necessary to engage the public in a manner which will enable as many members of the public to understand the bill and to provide informed and direct feedback to the committee to assist in its deliberations on the bill, and whereas the public health and safety restrictions consequent on the advent of COVID-19 severely restricts the committee's ability to engage the public physically, and whereas the committee is currently empowered to engage the public in a virtual manner which restricts the committee from effectively performing its mandate, be it resolved by this Honourable House that a committee be allowed to hold virtual meetings, whether wholly virtual or partly virtual and partly physical, utilizing available information and communication technologies as more specifically outlined below, preserving the rights, powers and privileges, including voting rights, normally accorded to a member of a committee. The committee is empowered to 1. Convene and hold meetings in virtual spaces created using information and communications technologies, which shall be considered committee meetings for the purposes of its mandate. 2. Allow access and participation from remote locations as are enabled by means of information and virtual technologies by members and other persons authorized by the committee. 3. Include members accessing and participating from remote locations as a part of its quorum. 4. Receive, consider, deliberate on, and respond to feedback and submissions in formats, modes, and media, and via platforms, modes, and media enabled by means of information and communications technologies from any person. And 5, consider any and all information generated, communicated, and received via formats, platforms, modes, or media as enabled by means of information and communications technologies as forming a part of the record of these committees. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move whereas Section 25 of the Cybercrimes Act 2015 provides that the provision of the Act shall be reviewed by a joint select committee of the House of Representatives 3 years from its date of commencement, and whereas the commencement date of this Act was December 22, 2015, be it resolved that notwithstanding Standing Order 76-1, this Honourable House of Representatives appoint a special select committee comprising of the following members: Honourable Darrell Vaz, Chairman; Honourable Floyd Green; Honourable Alanda Terrelong; Ms. Tamika Davis; Ms. Carencia Morrison; Mr. Franklin Witter; Mr. Julian Robinson, and Mr. Hugh Graham, to sit jointly with a similar committee to be appointed by the Senate to review and report on the Cybercrimes Act 2015. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Labour and Social Security, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, he will move to introduce and have read the first time a bill shortly entitled the National Insurance Validation, Indemnification and Amendment Act 2021.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice at the next meeting of the House. I'll move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Microcredit Act 2021.
Minister, Customs.
Madam Speaker, just a slight correction in my previous notice of motions given orally. I'd like to add Sir Nestor Morgan. Robert Nestor Morgan.
House Leader.
Madam Speaker, the time being 3:57, I now move that the House be allowed to receive and answer questions at this time.
Members of the House, the question is that there's a suspension of the standing orders to allow us to do the questions and answers to question, it being past 3:15. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, can the Prime Minister answer the questions which have been tabled in my name?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, and in keeping with your request for efficiency, I'm adhering to that and circulating the answers before I'm asked. Those are the correct ones. The member from St. Andrews South? Correct. Madam Speaker, the member from St. Andrews South asked the following questions on Southeast, forgive me. Would the Prime Minister please indicate the cost of the merger of Heart Trust NTA, the Jamaican Foundation for Lifelong Learning, the National Youth Service, and the Apprenticeship Board? Answer: the total cost of the merger of Heart Trust NTA, the National Youth Service, the Jamaican Foundation for Lifelong Learning, and the Apprenticeship Board is $313.7 million Jamaican dollars. This would have included costs for winding up of the other entities, those other entities being JFLL, NYS, and the Apprenticeship Board. And those costs specifically would be, for example, for redundancies. The Secretariat costs would also be included, change management costs, communication costs, job evaluation and labor relation consultancies, as well as sensitization and coordination activities. Question 2, would the Prime Minister please indicate if there has been an increase in the number of senior management, and by that the member would want to know specifically directors and senior directors, since the merger and the cost associated with that additional staff? The answer to that is yes, there has been an increase in the number of senior staff. We have provided a table for those who have the table in front of them. Table 2 below encompasses the number of senior management positions prior to the merger, and then details the current situation. So prior to the merger, we would have had 3 executive directors for the various agencies. You would have had an executive director for HART, an executive director for the NYS, and an executive director for JFLL. After the merger, instead of having 3 executive directors, we now have 1. In terms of senior directors, before the merger, there would be 11 senior directors. After the merger, we would have had 6. But at the level of directors, prior to the merger, we had 30, and after the merger, that was increased to 39. So before the merger, for the 3 organizations, we would have had 44 senior managers. After the merger, we now have 46 senior managers. So there has been a reduction in the executive director, the most senior level. There's a reduction in senior directors, moved from 11 to 6. But at the level of director, there has been an increase. And that is understandable, seeing that the organization is in transition and it has to manage, certainly at the regional level, more institutions, and therefore it requires more management staff at that intermediate level. The cost associated with that, with the additional 2 directors, would be $17.3 million. And that basically would be $6.8 million for basic pay plus allowances each. It's important, Madam Speaker, to note that though there is an increase in the senior management, it would not be fair to assume that there is an increase overall in the cost to the government for the merger. Indeed, that is not the case, even though the merger is not yet complete. The government would have had savings in terms of property rentals and so forth, in terms of merged corporate services and other administrative services. Would the Prime Minister, question 3, would the Prime Minister please indicate the reduction in the 3% employer contribution intake? Well, I suspect the question would be, would the Prime Minister please indicate what is the reduction or the quantum of the reduction in the 3% employer intake since the onset of COVID-19? The answer is, again, for those who have the document in front of them, Table 3 provides a comparison between the 3% revenue collection for the period April to October 2019 and April to October 2020. The table also encompasses data on the difference in revenue collected for both periods. And what it shows, Madam Speaker, is that in the period prior to the pandemic, the 3% collection, that is the employer's contribution to the Heart Trust, was $10.1 billion. And since the pandemic, up to December, the collection was $9.1 billion. So there is essentially a $1 billion reduction since the pandemic. It, Madam Speaker, based upon what the institution had planned, it is still above what we had budgeted, because we had expected that there would have been a greater fallout, but that did not materialize. So we did have a fallout, but it is not as bad as we had expected it to be. In fact, Madam Speaker, the country might be interested in knowing that though there was a decline in intake from the tourism sector, which is expected, there was actually an increase in the BPO sector and in the banking sector. So there are areas in the economy which survived and indeed was resilient to the pandemic. Question 4, how has this affected the Heart Trust in terms of its ability to deliver the projects and programs slated for 2021? Although face-to-face training has been suspended as a result of the pandemic, the agency has pivoted with the integration of distance learning methodologies and the implementation of 4 assessment centers in Kingston, Montego Bay, St. Anne, and May Pen to alleviate the assessment challenges and ensure that the institution is adhering to the social distancing protocols. The Trust projections for the resumption of face-to-face training for the coming months are dependent on the spread of the virus and the continuation of restrictions, as reflected in the Disaster Risk Management Act. So the Trust is, Madam Speaker, trying its best to be compliant, whilst at the same time being creative in delivering the training services. Question 5, and important to note, Madam Speaker, is that the Trust has also been very innovative. Just last week, or a few weeks ago, we launched the mobile training facility, where the Heart Trust has acquired 2 mobile units, where they are going to rural areas and bringing certification to the people. Will the Heart Trust have to draw down on the reserves that it has if the current 3% intake level holds for 2021? And the answer to that is, I have been fortunately advised, no, that's not projected at this time. But the situation is, of course, being carefully monitored, and the indications are that the Trust will be able to sustain itself. What percentage, that's question 6, what percentage of the Heart Trust budget is allocated for personnel and emoluments, excluding those directly involved in the delivery of training programs, pre-COVID and post-COVID? So, I suspect what the question is trying to get at would be, what is the level of non-training expenditure? So for the financial year 2019-2020, the percentage allocated to non-training delivery of the total budgeted expenditure was 10%, or 1.46 billion. So 10% of the expenditure was not directly related to training. And from what I've seen in educational institutions, this would be generally in line, and in fact, probably just even better than most. And then, in terms of post-COVID, what the situation is. So for the financial year 2020 to 2021, the percentage allocated to non-training delivery of the total budgeted expenditure rose to 15%, or 1.88 billion. The factors that would have contributed to this would be the increase in the cost and indeed in the number of non-direct training personnel, because you would now have integrated in heart staff from other agencies whose primary function is not training. So you're merging, for example, persons from JFLL and persons from NYS. So that would also account for the increase in the numbers. The establishment of HEART for 2019-2020 was 1,291 persons, compared to 1,578 persons for the period, for the fiscal year 2020-2021. So, as a result of the merger, the staff count at HEART moved from 1,291 to 1,578. But, Madam Speaker, that doesn't give the full picture, because you would have to compare that to what is the total staff complement of HEART, JFLL, NYS, and the Apprenticeship Board. And if you were to total them before merger, that would be 2,222 staff members. So in effect, the merger has reduced the staffing numbers and cost for the government. So the expenditure budget for 2020-2021 of $13 billion is less than the expenditure budget for the previous year of $14 billion. So, Madam Speaker, post-COVID, the agency is spending less. Less, yes, by virtue of maybe reducing some services, but also less because of some efficiency gains. So I believe, Madam Speaker, I would have answered the questions tabled by the member from Southeast St. Andrew.
Thank you, Prime Minister. At the heart of the questions that I asked, really, and this morning, the Heart Trust was at the Public Accounts Committee, it really relates to how efficient and effective the organization is being with the resources that are available. And I'm not convinced from the answer at question 6, nor from the information from this morning, that the rationalization that was anticipated and the savings from the merger are actually taking place, meaning additional layers of management have been added since the merger, a new parish structure, for example, and I question whether additional individuals are needed to effectively monitor the programs versus an improvement in processes, as an example. And I also question it. I was pleasantly surprised at the relatively small reduction of 10%. But I can say, as a member of Parliament, my NUYP program has been cut by 50%, right? And I say, and not speaking on my own behalf, I think everybody here would want more, because actually, at this point in time, there are more people who want to be trained. And so the reason given when we had that reduction, and I know it is not just for the NUYP, it would be across the board for almost all of HART's training programs, was the reduction in the 3% intake. So, Prime Minister, I believe there, and again, some of the issues come out of what we had the discussion this morning, and a more detailed examination of the efficiency of the organization. You know, we discussed certification rates, the basis for, you know, a 70% target and now a reduction to 50%. We looked at some other issues, but I believe there is more that we can do with the resources that are available. And at this particular point in time, with increasingly higher numbers of unemployed persons, I certainly have found more persons who want to participate in these training programs and who are willing, but there has been a reduction for those reasons. So I just think it's something that requires some oversight from your office in terms of ensuring that the efficiencies that are proposed in the merger actually take place and that HART operates at an optimal capacity.
Are you satisfied that HART is responding to the changes and the shifts that are taking place in the employment requirements that the country now faces? Indeed, if we're going to, in the post-COVID environment, if we're going to jumpstart the economy and to get the economy going and sustain that, then the training mix and what HART has done previously and what HART is now required to do, are you satisfied that they are focused in those areas, in those training areas? And I mentioned one in particular that you know is dear to me in the whole area of logistics training. We have been at it requesting to do more and to respond to that challenge, and to date the response has been slow at best. So overall, are you satisfied that that requirement and the shift in the economy that HART is responding to that challenge?
I want to thank the members for the questions that they have asked, and I'm indeed grateful for the opportunity to answer these questions on HART. And I will share with the Parliament my perspective on some issues. With us in the chamber would be the Executive Director of HART and the Permanent Secretary in OPM. I moved HART from education to OPM so that I could give it greater oversight. HART is one of the larger public bodies. And more than that, it has a dedicated source of funding. The challenge with such organizations is that they can become unwieldy. They can grow very large. They can become institutionalized. It becomes very difficult for them to change direction because they are such huge organizations. And they can become, as you say, very rigid in the programs that already exist by virtue of demands that we place on them, for example, because we want our programs to continue. We are not always going to be very receptive to new programs, but at the same time, there are other constituents, for example, the business community, who would want to see new programs introduced. So the organization is caught in some conflicting signals as to where and how it should dedicate resources. What we have decided to do, and I want to first of all acknowledge and to say that I am not here defending an institution. Like you, I am very concerned about the efficiency of HART. Not just HART, but all public bodies, and therefore the ones that fall directly under my oversight and supervision. I'm always seeking to ensure that they are operating efficiently. We decided to move ahead with the merger because on paper we saw that there would be clear benefits in the reduction of government expenditure and the increase in service to the public. Between what we project on paper and what executives actually do can be a gap. And for there not to be that gap, there has to be consistent and vigilant oversight of what the institution does. And that oversight has to come from the minister, it has to come from the board, it has to come from the Parliament through the PAAC and other organs, and it has to come from the various stakeholders. We will put a new board in place shortly. We will put a new board in place shortly. So I am not here saying to you that we have achieved the savings that we have. In fact, when I saw that there was an increase in the lower level directors, I was very concerned, but I have been assured that it was necessary in order to have the proper management and integration of the services regionally. We're still watching it to make sure that there is no creep away from the mission of being efficient and effective. But on the question that the member from St. Andrew Western asks, are there new programs? On Thursday, the government of Jamaica, in partnership with Amber Connect, will be launching the Coding Academy. Coding is the way of the future for mass employment for young people. I'm not, as I said, I'm running a leg in the race, and I'm going to be the fastest on my leg. I'm not looking behind, I'm moving forward. But we're launching, and this is going to be massive. So I won't say too much, but my answer to you is yes, we recognize that HEART has to be far more responsive to industry. And a part of that response is what we're going to be doing in coding to ensure that Jamaica can participate meaningfully in the fourth industrial revolution. There are other areas in which we're going to be partnering, and you'll hear more about them. But I've just point that one out because on Thursday we'll be doing a massive launch. And it is, I'm very happy with the program, and when it is launched, I'm sure the Jamaican public will also be satisfied. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, the Minister of Education will now answer questions.
Is her opposition not part of the questions? Is she in the House? Somebody check for her time. Time. Is there any member of the opposition that can? Asking for the questions standing in your name.
Would the minister answer the questions standing in my name?
Be answered.
All right, Madam Speaker. Of the questions, I think there's one question, but it has several parts. So part one of question one, would the minister state whether a report or assessment of the face-to-face reopening of schools, the pilot program, has been done? Yes, an assessment was done by the Planning and Development Division for the period November 10 to 2020, and a report was generated and taken to Parliament. At least two reports were generated, an interim report for the first week and another report, a final report for the 2-week period of the pilot. Part two of question one, if the answer to part one is in the affirmative, would the minister please indicate any gaps or breaches noted and the plans for their mitigation? And in particular, would the minister advise of those areas that require attention as per the Ministry of Health? In terms of gaps or breaches noted, the protocols for treating with students who display flu-like symptoms or medical emergencies, the plan for mitigation, school administrators were guided to prepare a plan of action to treat with cases of this nature. This was supported by the guidelines sent by the Ministry of Health and Wellness. The basic steps include temporary measures until medical health authorities got involved. So they would isolate the student in a prescribed area for the purpose of isolation. They'd notify the parents and the school board. Parents were to arrange for students to be transported home by direct pickup or support from family or the school. And in terms of comments, all schools have access to an updated version of the Education in Emergency Manual, prepared and distributed as a guide for educational institutions. Still continuing in terms of gaps or breaches noted, establishment of isolation areas as per the stipulations of the Ministry of Health and Wellness. All schools are expected to have a designated discrete isolation area for the sole purpose and not to be used alternatively with sick bays. All schools that are already reopened have identified and have received the approval of the Ministry of Health and Wellness as compliant, as outfitted with isolation areas. In the case of high schools in which classrooms or sick bays are not available to be used as isolation areas, provisions are made to procure tents to be used as isolation areas. And additional comments, sanitary facilities which are to be in close proximity to isolation areas are still being addressed in extreme circumstances. Safety hazards of canteen facilities. There were 2 schools in which this was an issue. Corrective measures were undertaken. Schools are reopened based on the clearance given by the Ministry of Health and Wellness on the physical plant and readiness adherence to protocol guidelines. Efforts are being made to address the needs in spite of constraints. Upon re-inspection, approval was granted by the Ministry of Health and Wellness for use of the canteen. Another area was the safe transportation of students. Expansion of the rural transportation program to provide dedicated transportation service for students has been considered. Schools have arrangements in place with bus drivers for transporting students in communities of greatest needs. Parents are now encouraged to have discrete arrangements for the transportation of students by clusters. And we continue to have further consultations, in particular with my colleague minister in the Transportation Ministry. Part 3 of the question, will the minister please indicate whether or not schools have moved from the pilot to full face-to-face opening? Yes, some schools have reopened for face-to-face pilot. The schools that have reopened for face-to-face pilot continued face-to-face schooling after the pilot phase and are expected to continue in January 2021. In some cases, a blended approach, that is face-to-face, online, audiovisual, and learning kits, was used. Special intervention by the guidance team for psychosocial interventions were done. Special approval was given to other schools that were deemed compliant and needed to start school in December, especially to accommodate grades 10 and 11 students. In other instances, select grade levels were targeted for face-to-face instructions. Part 4, will the minister say whether or not there has been a debriefing or discussion with principals, teachers for their feedback and the factors being used to guide the next step after the pilot? Debriefing meetings were convened with school leaders of all schools participating in the pilot, which started in November. Principals shared their experiences and challenges during the pilot period, and all school needs were addressed in keeping with the Ministry of Health and Wellness's protocols. In addition, recommendations were made for consideration when full face-to-face reopening was approved. And let me add that we do have an e-COVID task force. We have virtual meetings with our principals and board chairs. We have regular monthly meetings with JTA. We have meetings as well with the Principal Association of Jamaica. So we try to keep all the stakeholders in the loop about what is happening at the ministry and in terms of decisions that are made as we move forward. Part 5 says, would the Prime Minister please provide details on the level of internet connectivity available to Jamaica's students? I'm going to take that to mean, will the minister? So by our assessment, 65% of students have access to the internet. Ready TV was contracted to provide internet connectivity to 100 schools. To date, all 100 of these schools have been provided with service. In fact, I believe 103 schools. In addition, the ministry is partnering with Flow, Digicel, and the Universal Service Fund to increase bandwidth at all the schools. And I'm sure you would have heard some weeks ago, the Minister of Science, Energy, and Technology presented a fulsome overview of the broadband infrastructure that is being planned for Jamaica. And he followed that up with a press conference with even greater detail. Part 6 of the question, would the minister also provide details regarding the arrangements in place to provide safe transportation services to students? Currently, 239 schools are on the rural transportation system, which provides designated transportation services for students. In November of last year, a transportation working group was established by the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information to identify and address the general transportation needs of students to support the phased reopening of schools. The key objectives are to ensure that the COVID-19 protocols are established and operationalized to support the safety of the commuting public, especially students, and to support the ministry's rural transportation program to engage route or contract operators to provide transportation services to targeted students. To date, the ministry has achieved the following: a manual for the reopening of educational institutions. The ministry has produced its COVID-19 administrative manual, a guide to support the transportation services for students to address their transportation needs for the phased reopening of school. The ministry has convened its first in a series of meetings with the leadership of the Public Passenger Vehicle Association to mobilize and engage its membership to partner with schools to provide transportation services to students. In the first instance, the ministry is committed to ensure that the 7,500 students from 250 primary and high schools across 13 parishes are able to benefit from a safe and reliable subsidized transportation service as they prepare to return to school. The ministry, in partnership with the National Parent Teachers Association of Jamaica, is also committed to partner with the Public Passenger Vehicle Association and its membership to expand the school bus service that is paid for by parents. Schools, we've noted as well that schools have started to develop contracts with some of these providers, and some have started to transport the students. The ministry will continue to collaborate with the Ministry of Transportation and Mining as we continue the phased reopening of our schools. Part 7, would the minister also provide details regarding the availability of sick bays and isolation areas in schools? Secondary level schools, with the exception of a few, have a sick bay. Primary schools, on the other hand, do not have sick bays. However, all schools have accommodated for their isolation areas, which is a requirement of the Ministry of Health and Wellness for face-to-face operation. Where a school does not have the physical space for their isolation areas, temporary spaces have been erected using tents and portable wash stations, etc. These temporary measures have also been approved by the Ministry of Health. Question 2, Part 1. Would the minister please provide an update on the number of students who have thus far submitted applications under the Own Your Own Device Incentive Program? As of December 31st, it was 17,773 applications are submitted to the electronic system. Part 2, would the minister please provide details of any difficulties encountered during implementation of the program? The ministry has noted the following issues with the program and has worked assiduously with all stakeholders involved to resolve each issue. So, issues with the TRN validation. A valid TRN is required to successfully submit an application. If the persons do not have a valid TRN, they will not be allowed to make progress in the application. Applicants are asked to use the information as stated on their TRN cards to ensure that the details such as full name, date of birth, and TRN are accurate. This is especially important as the Tax Administration of Jamaica's database is used for verification. Issues with the SRN validation. The student registration number is required for the Own Your Own Device application process. Parents and guardians who intend to apply for the voucher incentive must have the SRN for their child in order to complete the application process. If a parent cannot locate the student's registration number, that parent may visit or contact the child's school where the number will be provided following a verification process. The parent may also obtain the number by contacting the NSRS unit at the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information. And we have some numbers: 876-612-5702, 888-338-2283, or 888-724-8463, or they could email us at educate@educate.gov.jm or oyod@moey.gov.jm or nsrs@moey.gov.jm. There were some technical issues. It was reported that some applicants were experiencing intermittent issues when transitioning from one stage of the application to the next. However, this matter was reported to the technical team and has since been resolved. For persons who are still having technical issues, we invite them to reach out to the ministry via the numbers that were previously stated, and we will have these issues investigated. There were some issues with schools not on the database. There have also been isolated issues with the names of a few schools not showing up on the database. These cases have been reported, and the team is currently working to investigate and have the list fully updated. Part 3, would the minister please address the specific issues with relation to the issuance of student registration numbers, which are now a requirement? The National Student Registration System, NSRS, which was established in 2010, has collected detailed and current demographic data on students who are enrolled across the education system. Consequently, a 9-digit student registration number is now required for all learners and has been provided for all students of grades 1 to 13, including private candidates and students who are homeschooled. School administrators of public and privately operated primary and secondary level institutions were provided with the username and password to access the NSRS database, and a list of all students who are registered on the database along with their student registration numbers was sent to each school's email address. Therefore, all parents can obtain the student registration number for their child or children from the school that the child or children attend. Since the launch of the OYOD program, there were many students in the education system who were identified as not being issued with their SRN, some of whom did not complete the registration process, the most frequent issue being the absence of a birth certificate. With the need for the SRN for the application, there has been an overrun on the system. However, provisions were put in place to ensure all students in the system are assigned a student number. Is the minister aware that many students have not been issued with an SRN and that this program was either suspended or stalled, thus putting many at a disadvantage? The minister is aware that many parents and guardians are not aware of their child's student registration number. Communication on what the National Student Registration System is and how to obtain a student registration number has been developed and distributed over the past several weeks to our schools and social media. The unit has reported that up to December 11, they have issued 31,136 SRN numbers to parents. Part 5, the final part. This being so, will the minister extend the deadline or indicate the alternative remedy to ensure that our students are not disenfranchised? The Ministry of Education, Youth and Information has taken the decision to extend the deadline for the electronic system for the Own Your Own Device Incentive Program to December 31, 2020. The Ministry has also increased the annual income requirement of parents from $300,000 to $500,000. And you would have heard earlier on in my statement, I've indicated that we have extended it even further in light of the many, the issues that parents have been having with their TRNs and the student registration number. So thank you. And just before I take my seat, let me just respond to the question that Member Golden raised to say a total of $4.1 million has been spent to date, $4.1 million to help students with connectivity, and it's about $1,500 per beneficiary. The amount budgeted for this term is $6 million, and if you do that math, it would be about 4,000 students that would benefit.
Minister, thank you so much for the responses that have been provided. Many of the questions that I posed really came to me from parents and teachers not having the information, and I wanted to make sure they had a way of getting it. So I'm glad that it's provided here. But when I look at a number of the questions and the information you have provided, you would note, for example, the whole issue of the student registration number could have been helped if the government had done some kind of public education around the student registration numbers, if you had the information about the number of students who had either not completed or where there were issues there, which would have prevented some anxiety, a level of anxiety on the part of parents. Just for clarification, part 4 of the second question, when you said that 31,136 student registration numbers have been issued, is that to date or was that during the period when you were doing the additions or sorting out the problems that occurred? So that's one question.
Okay, that would have been over the period since we announced the program, and issued means the person would have called, we would have verified them and given them the number on the phone. Or if they, after checking, if they didn't have the number, If the child truly did not have a number on the database, then it would be created for the child and given to the parent.
Thank you. Minister, 65% of our students have access to internet. Yeah, right. Minister, I would love for us to just check those numbers, because I believe that the percentage of our students with access to internet is important to know what that is, so we can fill the gap. And especially for the future, where we know that this is where we are headed, it's important to get that number right. So I just want to say that. And then the rural transportation system, Minister. I believe the last time I checked, there are still a number of persons where the system kind of wasn't up and running, and persons were concerned about exactly what was happening. It is a key element, not just to get our students safely to school, but as you would know, having started it already, that it is also an important cost-saving element, just based on the bus fares that a number of our rural students have to pay to get to school. So I'd love to make sure that is okay. In response earlier to the same system, the point was made that parents are now encouraged to have discrete arrangements for the transportation of students by clusters. And I was wondering exactly what that meant, exactly how that is expected to operate, and if that was the best approach in terms of putting it back in the hands of parents, which is what it seems here, to create these clusters for the transportation system of our rural students.
So, member, as was stated, 239 schools are on the rural transportation system, and obviously, if we could expand that, we would. Expansion is going to be based on budgets that we have to work with. I recall a study that was done by one of our international partners that looked at the reasons for students being absent from school, and transportation was one of the big issues, and that's why the ministry would have started this initiative. Obviously the children come from all parts of Jamaica. It's not easy to aggregate them in any one particular area to be able to transport them. But having had that study done that pointed out that this is an issue, as we go back to more and more schools in the face-to-face mode, obviously this is something that we have to keep on working on. And I believe that we can, through these different associations, bring information to parents to help them as well to make the best decision possible for the transportation of their children. This is a big problem, and a big, that we in the education sector will have to work to help resolve. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's one of those issues that I know is of concern, especially for persons living outside of Kingston, where you don't have the public transportation system that is so subsidized in Kingston. You don't have that in those rural areas. So.
House Leader.
Madam Speaker, the question and answer session is now completed. May it please you to continue with the agenda.
Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to sittings of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained.
Madam Speaker, I now move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Customs Act 2020.
A bill shortly entitled the Customs Act 2020 read a first time.
Minister.
Madam Speaker, I now beg you to give notice of second reading of the bill. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I'll move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take second reading of the bill and to have it referred to a select committee of this House to sit jointly with a similar committee to be appointed by the Senate for consideration and report. Madam Speaker, I now move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Independent Fiscal Commission Act 2020.
A bill shortly entitled the Independent Fiscal Commission Act 2020 read a first time.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice of a second reading of the bill. And Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I'll move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take a second reading of the bill.
Minister Vaz? Or go ahead. Go ahead.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Science, Energy and Technology, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which he gave earlier.
Where is that?
Oh, very well.
Public business.
Madam Speaker, public business will be commenced, in fact, with the report from the chair of the Ethics Committee, and then, of course, at a later point, the substantive debate that will be carried through initially by the Minister of Finance, who will be tabling the bill on the Customs Act 2020.
Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing order to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
The question is that the standing orders be suspended to enable us to take the motion, notice of which was given earlier. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, I now move that the motion, notice of which I gave earlier, be approved.
The question is that the motion, notice of which was given earlier, be now approved. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Motion approved.
Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
The question is that the standing orders be suspended to allow the minister to take the motion, notice of which he gave earlier. Those in favor? Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, the motion I gave earlier is really to get the approval of the Parliament for the Joint Select Committee on the NIDS bill to allow us to meet virtually. And that is, Madam Speaker, to allow the public at large to be able to participate. And we will be utilizing the media so that persons can not only listen and view the presentation to the Joint Select Committee, but they can also participate. So this, Madam Speaker, is to open up the Joint Select Committee so that members of the public can participate. And in those circumstances, Madam Speaker, I'm asking for the approval of the House so that we can proceed accordingly.
The question before the House is that the motion, notice of which was given earlier by the Minister, be now approved. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. Minister, motion is approved.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Science, Energy and Technology, I now move for the suspension of standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which he gave earlier.
The question before the House is that the standing orders be suspended to allow the Minister to have the motion, notice of which he gave earlier, approved. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, I now ask that the motion, notice of which I gave earlier, be approved.
The question before the House is that the motion, notice of which was given earlier, be now approved. Those in favour? The ayes have. Those against? The ayes have it. Your motion has been approved, Minister.
Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take reading of a bill shortly entitled the Customs Act 2020 and to have it referred to a select committee of this House to sit jointly with a similar committee to be appointed by the Senate for consideration and report.
The question before the House is that the standing orders be suspended to enable the Minister to take the second reading of a bill shortly entitled the Customs Act 2020 and to have it referred to a select committee of this House to sit jointly with a similar committee to be appointed by the Senate for consideration and report. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, before the bill can be referred to a joint select committee as indicated previously, it must be read a second time. I therefore move that a bill entitled an Act to repeal and replace the Customs Act and to provide for connected matters to be now read a second time.
Those in favour? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Madam Clerk.
A bill entitled an Act to repeal and replace the Customs Act and to provide for connected matters be now read a second time.
Madam Speaker, I now move, be it resolved that this Honourable House appoint a select committee comprising the following members: Nigel Clark, Honourable Fayval Williams, Honourable Marlene Malahoo Fort, Honourable Norman Dunn, Honourable Julian Robinson, Honourable Anthony Hilton, Honourable Hugh Graham, to sit jointly with a similar committee to be appointed by the Senate to consider and report on a bill entitled an Act to repeal and replace the Customs Act and to provide for connected matters.
The question before the House is that the motion be now approved. Those in favour? Those against? Motion is approved. The committee is appointed.
Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take reading of the Independent Fiscal Commission Act and to begin debate on the bill, Madam Speaker. I rise to yes.
Those in favour? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Minister.
Madam Speaker, I stand here today to commence the debate on an act to establish an independent fiscal commission to strengthen Jamaica's fiscal responsibility framework, to promote sound fiscal policy and fiscal management in an effort to sustain fiscal discipline and macroeconomic stability. And the bill is entitled the Independent Fiscal Commission Act 2020. Thanks. Madam Speaker, the policy focus of the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service has been organized around the principles of economic independence, economic opportunity for all, and protection of the vulnerable. As I have shared with the Jamaican public on various occasions, economic independence entails a domestication of the policymaking and consensus-building processes and requires us to pursue policies that results in Jamaica having greater flexibility and an increased ability to address priority areas as determined by Jamaicans, and doing so responsibly and without compromising that very independence. The policy-making and consensus-building processes that contributed to Jamaica's fiscal rehabilitation across successive administrations was built on principles that must continue to be the center of our pursuit of economic independence. And those principles were the enhancement of accountability of the policy-making process, a continuous deepening of the transparency of government finances, the strength and credibility of the government's fiscal path, inclusiveness in the policy discussion space, and importantly, taking greater societal ownership for Jamaica's economic direction. Madam Speaker, the bill being tabled today establishes an independent institution that embodies these principles. This is crucial to the achievement and maintenance of Jamaica's economic independence. This bill, Madam Speaker, is one of 3 bills I introduced in November to be taken together. The first was the amendment to the National Housing Trust Act of 2020 that extends the contribution of the NHT to the consolidated fund over the next 5 fiscal years. The second was the Financial Administration and Audit Amendment Number 2, Act 2020, which amends the automatic correction mechanism to be consistent with achieving our debt sustainability objectives while allowing for a fiscal path that is more accommodative of economic recovery. So given the impact of the pandemic, we looked ahead across the medium term to construct a fiscal path that is both consistent with economic recovery and debt sustainability. And in doing so, we had to provide for support to the consolidated fund over the medium term, and we had to adjust the correction mechanism in the fiscal rules, given the size of the economic impact of the pandemic. In return, we think it is important to make an irreversible commitment to the deepening of fiscal transparency with the creation of this independent institution. The Independent Fiscal Commission, Madam Speaker, has evolved out of our own experiences, which we have collectively learned over the past several years. The lesson of the painful generational cost of unsustainable finances. When you pursue finances that are unsustainable, it affects an entire generation. The instability, high unemployment, high inflation that result from fiscally indisciplined policy choices. We have learned how high debt crowds out the ability of the government to invest in social and physical infrastructure that improves the quality of life. We have seen how the economic dynamism that results from crowding in the private sector, as opposed to crowding out, all right? We've seen that dynamism. In the middle of a pandemic, the worst in 100 years, the construction sector would have grown by 7% in the September quarter, with commercial, retail, and office real estate development projects at a scale and pace we have not witnessed, certainly in my lifetime. We have seen how macroeconomic stability expands policy choice and provides the flexibility to absorb and respond to shocks, allowing for the prospects of quicker recoveries than otherwise would have been the case. And importantly, we see how mechanisms that are accountable and transparent, and when the public is informed with independent and credible analyses, that fiscal sustainability becomes a part of the national lexicon and a part of the national objective. And the lessons learned are by no means limited to what I've just outlined. Across political administrations, we've been able to transform economic prospects. Make no mistake about it, much more is left to be done, but we should never forget those lessons that we have learned and the sacrifices that we have made as a people. And the best way to honor that sacrifice is to deepen the institutional framework in a manner that is true to our experience. Because, Mr. Speaker, we have fiscal rules, but laws alone do not assure us of fiscal responsibility into the future. We need institutions too. The goal, therefore, is to have a domestic institution fit for Jamaica's purpose that combines the capacity for independent fiscal review and analysis that was provided by the fund, along with domestic monitoring and ownership and reporting that was embodied by EPOC, both of which contributed to Jamaica's internationally recognized fiscal transformation. Consistent with international best practices, the Independent Fiscal Commission's mandate will be to provide the public with an informed and independent opinion on the soundness and sustainability of Jamaica's fiscal policies and positions in keeping with Jamaica's fiscal responsibility framework. This institution was proposed by the government of Jamaica and has been embraced by several other Jamaican stakeholders. I know the Leader of the Opposition would have expressed his support of this initiative by calling for, in using his words, EPOC to be institutionalized. The process to get here today involved broad stakeholder consultation, which included public fora hosted by CAPRI, consultations hosted by the Ministry of Finance, as well as consultations facilitated by a firm led by the former head of Canada's Independent Fiscal Institution, who also provided advice and assistance with the policy development. The legislation benefited from technical advice and support from a number of sources, Madam Speaker, and we recognize and thank them all. The Canadian consultants were funded by an IDB project, which in turn benefited from European Union donor funds. The Fiscal Affairs Department of the IMF reviewed early drafts of the government's policy proposals and made several important contributions. And finally, Impact Justice, which is a Canadian initiative that assists CARICOM member states in the implementation of their legislative agendas, provided sound advice on the draft legislation. In addition, I express gratitude to the teams at the Ministry of Finance, the Attorney General's Chambers, the Office of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel, and the members of the Legislative Committee who worked to ensure we could have tabled this bill last November. Madam Speaker, under Jamaica's fiscal responsibility framework, which is primarily set out in the Financial and Administration Audit Act, the Auditor General currently carries out some fiscal oversight functions which are to be transferred to the Fiscal Commission and greatly expanded. The Independent Fiscal Commission will be an institution that is exclusively dedicated to being the guardian, interpreter, and arbiter of Jamaica's fiscal rules. That is the only thing that it will do. It will monitor compliance with Jamaica's fiscal rules. It will keep the public informed on economic matters according to a scheduled calendar, and it will provide independent analysis on fiscal policy developments. Jamaica's Independent Fiscal Commission will embody the principles of credibility, accountability, transparency, inclusiveness, ownership, and permanence, which will help Jamaica maintain a path of prudence, enhancing our economic independence. Madam Speaker, I will now do a clause-by-clause presentation of the bill. Clause 1 states the short title and commencement and addresses preliminary issues such as the name of the bill and provides for the possibility that different provisions of the bill may come into operation on different appointed days. This is important, Madam Speaker, as the Auditor General currently carries out important functions under the fiscal responsibility laws, and although I'll discuss consequential amendments to the FAA Act, we are all too familiar with the delays that can attend in the setting up, well, not the delays, with the time that it takes to properly set up a new office with important functions. So although the bill will have been passed, it is envisioned that Auditor General will continue to carry out those functions that are carried out today while this new commission is established and staffed. Clause 2, the interpretation clause, gives critical definitions, including the definition of the advisory committee, which will form part of the structure of the Fiscal Commission, the Fiscal Commission, the Fiscal Commissioner, and the specified public sector. Importantly, the type of information that the Fiscal Commissioner will request is defined as relevant information, and this means information relating to the revenue and expenditure of the Government of Jamaica or regarding any operation within the specified public sector that is required by the Fiscal Commissioner for the proper execution of his or her functions under the Act, but does not include personal data within the meaning of the Data Protection Act. Clause 3 sets out the establishment and functions provision and establishes a commission of Parliament to be known as the Independent Fiscal Commission. The Commission, like other such bodies established in as many as 37 countries around the world, including the United Kingdom, Grenada, and the Bahamas, to shore up fiscal responsibility by governments, will provide the public, Madam Speaker, and I want to emphasize the public, with an informed and independent opinion on the soundness and sustainability of Jamaica's fiscal position and policies in keeping with the fiscal responsibility framework set out in Part 7 of the Financial Administration and Audit Act. It will examine the components of the fiscal policy paper laid before the Houses of Parliament and report to the Parliament on whether the conventions and assumptions underlying the fiscal policy paper comply with the principles of prudent fiscal management as set out in the FAA Act. It will monitor the government's adherence to the fiscal responsibility framework, report on ex-post fiscal outcomes during and at the end of the fiscal year relative to the commitments and targets set by the government. It will assess the impact of shocks that could trigger the suspension of the fiscal rules, validating the impact of these shocks. It will assess the circumstances where the correction mechanisms in the fiscal responsibility framework have been triggered and whether the measures laid out therein achieve the required adjustments, and if not, provide the estimate on the magnitude of additional measures that may be required. Madam Speaker, the Fiscal Commission, in addition to the functions I've outlined, will assess the consistency of the fiscal balance path and conduct independent forecasts and analyses of the macroeconomic and fiscal position of Jamaica and do all such things that are necessary and expedient for giving effect to the purposes and provisions of the Act. Madam Speaker, in these analyses and forecasts, the Fiscal Commission doesn't have any power to make any policy, to make any laws, but what it does is to provide independent, credible information that can inform the body politic and help provide the incentive and disincentive structure for responsible policy making long into the future. The Fiscal Commissioner, Madam Speaker, will be appointed by the Governor-General by instrument under the Broad Seal after consultation with the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, and shall be a person of high integrity who possesses knowledge, expertise, and experience in the areas of public finance, macroeconomic forecasting, and fiscal policy management. Madam Speaker, I wish to highlight that the appointment mechanism of the Fiscal Commissioner is meant to uphold the legal and operational independence of this Commission of Parliament. Given its critical role in assessing the government's fiscal performance against its target and policies, the independence of the Fiscal Commission must be guaranteed. It must be enabled to carry out its functions and conduct its operations free from interference from government and fiscal authorities. This bill provides for this independence, Madam Speaker, throughout its provisions. So today, the Auditor General provides some level of fiscal oversight that is being transferred to the Fiscal Commission. And it's very important that the Fiscal Commission retains its independence. Now, we are adding to those functions, so it goes beyond what the Auditor General does in an important way that I'll get to later on. Clause 4, Madam Speaker, provides for the tenure of the office and the restriction on employment. The Fiscal Commissioner is to be appointed for a period of 7 years and shall not be eligible for reappointment thereafter. The 7 years, Madam Speaker, very importantly, extends over the period of 2 administrations. If the issue of removal of the Fiscal Commissioner arises before the end of his tenure or her tenure, the Governor-General, after consulting with the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, shall appoint a tribunal to inquire into the matter and to report its findings to the Governor-General. The Fiscal Commissioner, Madam Speaker, is a full-time officer and, except with the approval of the Governor-General, shall not be employed in any other capacity. Clause 5 provides for the factors that disqualify persons from appointment as Fiscal Commissioner. They include being under the age of 18, being a member or a former member of the Senate or the House of Representatives at some time during the 5 years preceding the period for which the person seeks appointment as fiscal commissioner. Similarly, being a member or former member of a council of a municipal corporation, city or town municipality within 5 years of seeking appointment, someone who has declared bankruptcy, or someone who has been convicted of a crime involving dishonesty or moral turpitude. Clause 6 addresses the filling of the vacancy in the office of the Fiscal Commission. Clause 7 addresses the usual provisions to do with the funds and accounts of the Fiscal Commission. They will be audited by the Auditor General annually, and the estimates of expenditures to be submitted to the Minister for approval. Clause 8, Madam Speaker, provides for the remuneration of the Fiscal Commissioner. In keeping with the usual provisions of other commissions of Parliament, the terms and conditions of service of the Fiscal Commission are to be determined by a bipartisan commission of Parliament of both houses. Again, Madam Speaker, this bill seeks to insulate the Fiscal Commissioner from political interference. Clause 9 addresses the pensions and gratuities of the Fiscal Commissioner and provides in summary that once the Fiscal Commissioner retires in pensionable circumstances, he or she will be paid pension and gratuities in accordance with the first schedule of the bill. Clause 10 outlines provisions for the appointment of staff of the Fiscal Commission. Madam Speaker, it is the Fiscal Commissioner that will appoint and employ the staff of the Fiscal Commission. The terms and conditions of service are determined by the Bipartisan Commission of Parliament, earlier reference that is comprised of members of both houses. Clause 11 sets out provisions on the protection of the Fiscal Commissioners and officers. It states that the Fiscal Commission and every person appointed to the staff of the Fiscal Commission shall not be held personally liable for any act or default of the Fiscal Commissioner done in good faith in the course of the operations of the Commission. Clause 12 sets out provisions on the oath of secrecy and confidentiality in respect of any information or matter relating to the work of the Fiscal Commission. Both the Fiscal Commissioner and the staff of the Commission must swear to such an oath. It is to be noted, Madam Speaker, that information to do with the revenue and expenditure of the government of a highly sensitive nature will be shared with this office, and so it is absolutely critical that the Fiscal Commission maintains a high level of secrecy and confidentiality. There is a penalty of a fine of $1 million and a term of imprisonment up to a year if these provisions are breached. Clause 13 provides for the independence of the Fiscal Commission and the delegation of functions. The Fiscal Commissioner shall not be subject to the direction and control of any persons or authority in the carrying out of the functions of the Fiscal Commission. Madam Speaker, the Fiscal Commission is to provide non-partisan oversight of the fiscal performance and analysis of key aspects of fiscal policy, and thus cannot and should not be under the direction and control of anyone in carrying out that function. This provision ensures that the independence of this office is not encroached upon by anyone. In addition, the provision sets out that the Fiscal Commissioner shall carry out the functions in an objective, transparent, and impartial manner. Madam Speaker, Clause 14 addresses access to information. The Fiscal Commissioner may at any time require any officer or member of the specified public sector, subject to their enabling laws, to provide him or her with such relevant information as may be deemed necessary to carry out the functions of that office. To that end, the Fiscal Commissioner may enter into arrangements with any member of the specified public sector regarding the provision of relevant information. And those arrangements may be MOUs to establish the terms under which information is provided. I wish to pause at this juncture and explain the provisions in relation to the specified public sector, Madam Speaker. The specified public sector, as defined in this bill, has its origins in the Financial Administration and Audit Act and means the public sector, not including any public body certified by the Auditor General in the prescribed manner, as primarily carrying out functions that are of a commercial nature that satisfy such criteria as may be prescribed. Historically, the central government and certain public bodies have been identified as posing a fiscal risk as it relates to spending and borrowing and public financial management in general. It is for risks such as these that the fiscal responsibility framework was enacted, Madam Speaker. Hence, the bill seeks to focus the attention of the Fiscal Commission on the specified public sector. Clause 15, Madam Speaker, and the determination of the entities that are in the specified public sector is a responsibility of the Auditor General, and that remains even with the Fiscal Commission in place. Clause 15 sets provisions for the preparation of the economic and assessment report and the report on the statement of fiscal performance. Now, these reports don't currently exist, and these will be new requirements that the Fiscal Commission will be required to undertake. These reports are prepared on 2 occasions in the fiscal year by the Fiscal Commission, in respect of June 30 and December 30, the quarters ending June 30 and December 30th. These reports provide an assessment on the macroeconomic and fiscal forecasts and the macroeconomic assessment provides an assessment on the macroeconomic and fiscal forecasts and an evaluation as to whether the government's announced policies are consistent with the fiscal rules, principles, and targets. Importantly, this report also makes an assessment of medium and long-term debt sustainability, providing sensitivities to the movement of underlying variables. So what I've just described is provided twice a year in the table of the fiscal policy paper and the interim fiscal policy paper. And importantly, it provides for debt sustainability analysis, which is something over the last 7 years, debt sustainability analyses were provided by the IMF. They're the ones who did those analyses, and they would give that information to us, and they'd publish it. Well, if we want to be an independent country and we want to be able to make our own policy choices, we have to have the capacity right here in Jamaica to do our own debt sustainability analysis and not depend on the IMF when they do theirs every 2 years or so forth. So what we're providing for here, this is going to mean that the Ministry of Finance is going to have to do its own debt sustainability analysis and publish it. And you have a fiscal commission that will comment on it and do their own. Okay? Now, in this field, in matters of opinion, no 2 independent entities that carry out the same assessment will have the identical results. And what we want is a fertile environment where we have credible institutions and that inform the public. I'll give an example. In our years with the IMF, they would regularly come out with their assessments and reports and their forecasts. And there were times when the ministry's forecasts were more accurate than the funds. Or I should use the word less than more accurate. The results were closer to the ministry's forecasts than with the fund's forecast. In areas such as, what the forecasted debt to GDP ratio would be at the end of the year. But if the fund came out and said, it's going to be 94%, and the ministry said it's going to be 92%, and ends up being 92.5, the fact that you have 2 forecasts, one at 92, one at 94, is healthy. And should not be a source of any tension. As far as debt sustainability is concerned, what is going to be new here, Madam Speaker, is the requirement that right here in Jamaica, we perform our own debt sustainability with the sensitivities of what happens if various variables move, and our conversation is going to have to be mature in that we don't engage in scaremongering tactics. We are able to credibly and so in a sober manner look at the path over the next 5 years at any time and ask ourselves, how sensitive are we to movements in interest rates or movements in the exchange rate or movements in other underlying variables? And that to be a natural feature. And as I said, that function would have been provided by the IMF over the past, in the 7 years that we were in fund-sponsored programs. Now, the report on the statement of fiscal performance will provide an assessment of the government's achievement of budget targets and fiscal targets. And that is a report that comes out in June and December of each year. So it is that report takes a look at the revenue and expenditure outturns, and they just publish to the website what the government's fiscal results have been. After you've been doing this for 5 years, 6 years, it just becomes a routine part of the information in the public landscape. Over the past 7 years, we have become used to hearing the minister speak about what happened at the end of the quarter, but we've also become useful to hearing the fund amplified by our own monitoring body, EPOC, speak about end-of-quarter performance. And this seeks to replicate our own experience. As a government, Madam Speaker, committed to the principles of transparency and open government, this bill provides that the Fiscal Commission shall publish on its website not only these two reports after tabling in its Honourable House, but may publish any reports it prepares in relation to its functions. So you will recall, Madam Speaker, earlier this year there was a little kerfuffle when the budget is tabled in February, and by the time the minister presents 8 weeks later, things can change. And in this year, we adjusted the primary balance. And there was a big, the former leader of the opposition, you adjust the primary. Well, if you're only doing your assessments twice a year, as exists now, then I can understand such a reaction. When you have this architecture, where you have an independent fiscal commission that every quarter is issuing reports, if the Minister of Finance has reason to make a change between those intervals, in that interval I mentioned, then the report from the budget having passed by March 30th, the Fiscal Commission is going to pronounce June 30th, right? So there's no getting away. It's a continuous process of having a second opinion and information in the public landscape, and it allows for dynamic policy making in response to situations as they evolve and as they change. Clause 16, Madam Speaker, provides that the Fiscal Commission shall submit reports to Parliament in relation to the execution of its functions. But the important thing about publishing to the website is that our experience has been that when Jamaica is engaged, broadly speaking, about our performance, and the fiscal responsibility has become a part of the national lexicon, we want that to remain, and therefore the engagement of the public at large is a very important feature of the establishment of this institution. Now, Madam Speaker, in our consultations, I know we had reason to dialogue with the former leader of the opposition, the current leader of the opposition, and who expressed a desire for us to incorporate in this structure a feature that is sort of consistent with our experience of having the domestic monitoring that EPOC provides. Madam Speaker, as I've said in public before, EPOC does not provide any independent analysis. It has no capacity to do macroeconomic forecasts or to do any analysis whatsoever. Those analyses were done by the fund, and EPOC would have magnified and so forth. However, what was useful about EPOC, well, among other things, was the fact that you had a diverse set of Jamaicans who were involved in the process. And we have sought to be faithful to that experience, which in Clause 17, which provides for a fiscal advisory committee. Because the Fiscal Commission, however, Madam Speaker, will have access to highly sensitive information, it would not be appropriate for members of the public at large, one or two members of the business community in particular, to have access to that kind of data and information. So it's necessary for this to be an advisory committee that cannot in any way fetter the independence of the Commission, in the same way that EPOC could never fetter the independence of the IMF, and EPOT never had access to the data that the IMF had, which came from the ministry, right? So Clause 17 addresses the establishment and functions of the Fiscal Advisory Committee. Madam Speaker, the Fiscal Advisory Committee shall advise the Fiscal Commission on key macroeconomic and fiscal developments and outlook while not encroaching on the independence of the Fiscal Council. For full transparency, the meeting schedule of the Advisory Committee will be disclosed a year in advance, and minutes of meetings will be published within 6 weeks or prior to the next meeting, whichever is earlier. And by having the meeting schedule in advance, you preserve the independence of the office. There can't be any suspicion that, oh, because they met with them on this date, then that happened, right? You're gonna meet with the fiscal commissioner 4 times a year or 6 times a year. It's published in advance, and the minutes of your meeting are made public. So there ought to be no private advantage that you gain from serving on the Fiscal Advisory Committee, and hence is required to divulge the minutes of meetings. The Advisory Committee shall comprise of 5 members from academia, the private sector, trade unions, and civil society, being consistent with our experience over the past 2 administrations, and shall be appointed by the Governor-General after consultation with the Minister and the person designated by the Leader of the Opposition to be the spokesperson on finance. Clause 18, Madam Speaker, provides for regulation-making powers of the Fiscal Commission. Clause 19 references the 3rd schedule, which outlines certain consequential amendments to the FAA Act. The 1st, 2nd, and 3rd schedules, Madam Speaker. The 1st schedule addresses the pension entitlement of the Fiscal Commissioner if he or she demits office under pensionable circumstances. The 2nd schedule contains the oath to be taken by the Fiscal Commissioner and staff, and the 3rd schedule sets out the amendments to be made to the FAA Act. Madam Speaker, with the passage of this law, the Independent Fiscal Commission is a permanently appointed commission of Parliament that is meant to offer more than just periodic reviews of the government's fiscal performance. This institution will perform real-time and continuous assessment and analysis of the macro-fiscal consequences of the government's fiscal policies, publishing reports quarterly, and in so doing will strengthen fiscal discipline and transparency in public financing at the critical policy stage. Madam Speaker, it is of significance that even in the midst of the pandemic, we are looking ahead, building economic institutions with the conviction that in the long run, credible, durable, accountable, transparent, and robust institutions make the difference in the economic development process. Madam Speaker, I now seek the support of the members of this Honourable House in passing this bill, the Independent Fiscal Commission Act 2020. Well, not passing. I apologize. Madam Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to conclude the opening of the debate on the Independent Fiscal Commission Act, and I look forward to the contribution of the opposition spokesperson next week, and I will then close, and that paragraph I will then read again. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Minister.
This wouldn't constitute my substantive response, and the opposition leader also wants an opportunity to respond next week. But
may I invite you to do your, yes. Members, the question before the House is that the debate be suspended until next week, when all members will give their substantial contribution to the debate. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Who is? House Leader?
Yes. Madam Speaker? You're speaking? Sorry. Madam Speaker, It is not intended to do any further business for the day. I therefore invite you to adjourn this House until Tuesday the 19th of January at 2 p.m.
The question before the House is that we do adjourn until next week, Tuesday, the 21st, the 19th of January. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. This House is now adjourned.
The new NITS bill has been drafted and is ready for review. We want to hear from you. Go to www.japarliament.gov.jm